I sat across from the admissions committee in a narrow conference room that smelled faintly of old coffee. My hands gripped a manila folder, my transcripts, my portfolio, the letters of recommendation on thick letterhead with the signatures of aging professors. I could hear the blood pulse in my ears, matching the staccato ticking of the clock on the far wall. A panel of 4, dressed in sober charcoal and navy, watched as the chairman, Professor Nakamura, whose white hair gave him the look of a weary scholar, set my file on the table. He cleared his throat as if gathering his voice from deep inside. "Miyamoto-san, we appreciate the dedication you've shown, but we've reviewed your audition and materials. We do not feel that you are suitable for advancement in our program at this time." My mother's words echoed in my memory, "Music is for dreams, not for your life." The phrase rolled through me, wrapped in bitterness and disbelief. I kept my eyes fixed on the glossy tabletop. Professor Nakamura continued gently but definitely, "We encourage you to try other paths. Music is a high summit, not everyone who wishes can reach it." There was a pause. One professor shuffled her papers. Another twisted a pen in his hands. No one met my gaze except Nakamura, and what I saw in his eyes was neither contempt nor sympathy, just the cool, indifferent regard of someone tasked with shattering illusions. I nodded once as if this was a statement I would accept. "Thank you for your time," I said, though my voice caught and dried at the edges. Out in the corridor, my violin case felt heavier than ever, dragging my shoulder down. Fresh faces passed by, laughing and moving in small, confident clusters. My feet moved of their own accord, carrying me down the long hall, out beneath sakura trees shedding their last trembling petals, into the pale Tokyo morning. My heart thrummed in my throat, a cathedral of hurt and dignity, while the city moved around me, indifferent as the committee upstairs. At home, dinner that night was perfunctory. My father ate in silence, eyes on the news blaring from the living room. My brother Takuya kept glancing at me, as if expecting me to dissolve into tears or beg for sympathy. My mother poured tea, lips drawn in a line so narrow it seemed folded in upon itself. After a while I said I didn't get in. There was a clicking of chopsticks. My brother let out a single very soft exhale, almost a laugh, and looked quickly away. My mother wiped a hand across her face. "Perhaps it's better this way, Kenji. You can't survive on music in this world. You should look for real work." My father, eyes now glued to the screen, didn't say anything, but it was enough. I had always known where I stood, an eccentric failure in a family of realists. Their love was quiet and practical. I felt its limits that night more than ever, as if, by failing, I had proved them right. Even the neighbors in the days that followed seemed to sense it. Mrs. Tanaka, who lived 2 doors down, cornered me in the alley behind the apartments, arms folded over her ample chest. "It's shameful, Ken-chan, to chase fantasies when your family works so hard." Her words bit into my skin, but nothing strung like Takuya. He had always been the golden son. Quick to laugh, as sturdy as a cedar, always on the sports field or with an offer to take over father's business someday. That evening, after everyone went to bed, he knocked on my door. He stood for a moment in silence. "You really thought you could make it, didn't you?" he asked. I kept my back to him. "What's wrong with trying?" He shrugged, hands in the pockets of his track pants. "Tokyo University of the Arts rejects nearly everyone. This was always a long shot for you, Ken. Maybe Mom's right." When he left, I sat in darkness, running my fingers over the smooth neck of my violin. Its wood was warm and familiar against my chin, but my hands trembled. I played a few scales in the gloom, letting the sound pool against the window. Each note felt hollow, a shadow of the music I wanted to create. Spring slipped into summer. I worked mornings at a convenience store, stacking shelves, the fluorescent lights buzzing constantly overhead. In the afternoons, I practiced in my room, playing until my fingers ached. Sometimes, if I lingered too long, my mother would rap sharply on the door and hiss, "Enough, we all need quiet." I sent out tapes, applications, emails to orchestras and music schools abroad. Most didn't even reply. The few rejections I received were polite, each wrapped in the same pallid language: "We regret to inform you." Yet I clung to the dream, as battered as it was. When the nights came, I walked Tokyo's summer streets alone, under the neon signs, past salarymen in white shirts, through the crowded squares where buskers played raucous pop songs to clusters of tourists. Sometimes when the street thinned, I pulled out my violin and played. Nothing grand, just Bach's partita or a movement from Paganini. Strangers would pause, a few tossed coins, most just kept walking. but I noticed sometimes the look in their eyes, a fleeting connection. It was everything. Life at home grew tighter, my mother's patience narrowed to remarks steeped in regret. My father's disappointment settled, silent and immovable like dust in the corners of our small apartment. Takuya joked about me to his friends. I heard him one afternoon, voice carrying through the thin walls. Ken's still pretending to be a musician. He'll be 40 and working the register at Family Mart. Something inside me solidified with each day, a defiant core, a sense of myself pressed thin but somehow unbreakable. I learned to hear my own music above the din of others' doubts. Everything changed one sticky August evening when I heard about an open audition for a new city orchestra forming in Yokohama. The flyer was posted outside a music shop, battered and half-torn, but offering hope to all players with a passion for classical performance. I traveled to Yokohama 2 days later, crammed into a hot commuter train, violin wedged between my knees. The auditorium was plain but clean, a faint scent of wax polish in the air. I waited backstage, knees trembling as the other musicians eyed me, some with polite indifference, others with hostile curiosity. When it was my turn, the conductor, a tall German with wire-rimmed glasses and precise, clipped Japanese, nodded for me to start. I chose the final movement of the Tchaikovsky violin concerto. My fingers, to my surprise, obeyed with a sureness born of desperation and repetition. Each note rang out clear and certain, filling the room with the ache and yearning that had lodged in my chest for years. When I finished, my arms quivered. The conductor blinked. "You have something, come to rehearsal next week." It was not exultation, not yet, but it was something more powerful, the first crack in a wall I'd nearly convinced myself was impenetrable. I began rehearsing with the orchestra, commuting daily from Tokyo, packing all I owned into a battered rucksack, living off vending machine rice balls and cups of instant noodles. The other players ranged from prodigies to journeymen, a patchwork of personalities and egos. The first violinist, a sharp-eyed woman named Sora, watched me with tight-lipped skepticism. "Where did you study, really?" she prodded. When I told her about the university committee, she smirked. "Most of the best are self-taught anyway, just don't get left behind." The rehearsals were relentless, the conductor's standards unforgiving. But I thrived under the pressure, each measure an assertion of my right to stand among them. My world shrank to the feel of fingerboards and bowstrings, the surge of crescendos blooming in packed halls. Months became years. Our orchestra grew bolder, booking halls in Nagoya, then Osaka, then a late-night spot as the opening act for a festival at Suntory Hall in Tokyo. After each concert, I would stand on stage, soaking in the applause, wondering if my family was watching, or if they even knew I was there. 5 years after the committee dismissed me, I received an unexpected call. An organizer from NHK, the national broadcaster, had seen one of our concerts and wanted to feature the orchestra for a televised competition, one backed by the Ministry of Culture, with guests from international conservatories. A soloist was needed, someone who could capture both technical mastery and emotional rawness. The conductor called me into his office. He spoke calmly, folding his hands on the desk. "Kenji, I want you to do it. You play not only with skill, but with, how do you say, a soul that bleeds a little." The final rehearsals were a dizzy blur. My entire body seemed to vibrate with expectation. Music and nerves tangled together until I could hardly eat. The night before the broadcast, I took the last train home and stood outside my family's apartment for a long time, violin case in hand, looking up at the dark windows. I didn't go in. The day of the performance, the studio pulsed with hot lights and frantic stagehands. I closed my eyes backstage, feeling my father's cologne, my mother's sharp words, the laughter of Takuya, all of it threading through my thoughts. When my turn came, all that fell away. I played Bartók's Violin Concerto No. 2, a piece that burned with longing and resilience. Each passage was a declaration: "I am here, I survived, I have not broken." The last note hung in air so thick you could cut it. For a breathless moment there was silence, then the applause surged. I bowed, the light slicing across the stage in blinding arcs. I could not see the faces, but I felt them. Thousands of watching eyes, some surely familiar. The phone at my parents' home rang off the hook that week. My mother answered most times with confusion and, I imagined, embarrassment. "Yes, he's my son, yes, that's him on TV." My father said little to anyone. When Takuya's friends called to ask if the genius violinist was really his brother, he had nothing to say. The NHK performance led to invitations, guest soloist with the Tokyo Symphony, a recording contract, photographs in glossy magazines holding my battered violin. For a while, my days were filled with rehearsals, interviews, flights to Seoul and Singapore, and yet amid it all, I found myself thinking about home, about the Tokyo sky after a spring rain, the low hum of anger and pride I'd carried since that rejection day. Success, like music, is a strange echo. It fills a void but never quite replaces what was lost. So I decided to return finally to the place where I had started, to the family and the neighborhood that had mocked and doubted me, to see what, if anything, had changed. On the first day of winter, I stood at the outskirts of our old neighborhood, the air cut with a dry chill, and all around me were the sights and scents of my childhood. The smoke from a yakitori stall, the metallic clang of bicycle bells, the distant boom of the Yamanote line. I took it all in. I wore no disguise. After all, my photo had been plastered across local stores since the NHK broadcast. I visited the community center first, a squat building whose walls still bore the watermarks from the last flood. Inside, a crowd had gathered, neighbors young and old, the air popping with curiosity and skepticism. I saw Mrs. Tanaka among them and waved, the sight of her pinched face oddly comforting. I'd arranged, through an old friend, to give a short homecoming concert for the local children, a way to give back and perhaps to show the skeptics with their own eyes what had become of the ridiculous violinist who never listened. As people filed in, I found a seat for my parents in the front row. My father arrived in his neat work suit, stiff and remote. My mother, hair recently colored, held herself cautiously like someone bracing for bad news. Takuya sat beside them slouched, as if being seen beside me was embarrassing and yet necessary, because everyone else would be there too. I tuned my violin backstage. My hands shook, not from fear of playing, but from the fear that the music might not say everything I needed it to. 2 decades of striving, compressing down to the thin sliver of an evening in my old neighborhood. I stepped onto the makeshift stage. The room fell silent, then buzzed with low murmurs. A few of the women I remembered from my childhood nudged each other, whispering. There was the disbelief, the lingering scorn in their eyes. But I began to play. I chose Elgar's Salut d'amour, its sweet, plaintive melody full of regret and hope. The notes hung in the close air, shimmering above the heads of children fidgeting in bright winter coats. I poured my heart into every bow stroke, letting all the old shame, all the hunger and longing and fragile tenacity well up and pour out until I felt emptied, transformed. When I finished, the room was still. Then the applause came, tentative at first, then a swelling wave crashing out across the hall. I bowed and looked up. My father's eyes glimmered with tears he could not hide. My mother, for the first time in years, was smiling, a simple, genuine smile unadorned by regret. Takuya stood clapping, face alive with a pride he would never voice but which needed no words between us. The skeptics rose one by one. Mrs. Tanaka approached, bowing awkwardly. Kenji-kun, it was beautiful. We always wondered if you'd really do it. We're proud. Afterward, the children rushed to touch my violin, wide-eyed with something I recognized. Belief before the world teaches them otherwise. My parents lingered. My mother embraced me so tight I could hear each shallow breath. My father shook my hand, holding it for longer than necessary. We walked home together under the thin winter light. There was much left unsaid, many wounds not so easily healed. But I could feel those things shifting, changing shape, as we moved through the streets that had once closed me off and now seemed, finally, to open. In my room, still lined with faded posters and stack of forgotten CDs, my violin sat on the desk, quietly gleaming. I lay awake that night listening to the soft breaths of my family, the city humming gently beyond the thin walls. For the first time in years, hurt gave way to something richer, forgiveness, pride, and the sure sense that music, like home, could not be denied forever.